Okay, so today I'm going to talk about training my bowling athletes. So when we're training these athletes, we need to keep in mind what movement patterns they go through and what muscles and joints they use. A bowler goes through three main movement patterns. They go through a pushing motion, pulling motion, and a walking motion. They initially start the movement of their sport by holding the ball in front of them and walking forward. Then they pull it back and push it through to the pins. The muscles that bowlers use include, but not limited to, shoulder extensors, flexors, elbow flexors and extensors, pronators, supinators, the trunk musculature, the traps and other uh, back musculature. It also uses the legs, the quads and hamstrings are dominant. Um, it also activates the hip flexors and extensors and the glute muscles. The joints that are trained are the glenohumeral joint, radiocarpal joint, ulnohumeral, radiohumeral, hip joint, and the tibiofemoral joint. All the energy systems are always active, but the primarily one that is trained is the phosphagen system, and the secondary system is the glycolytic system. The sport is always off and on, but is very short, so it is almost always phosphagen. We always want to warm up our athletes first. So during this warm up, we want to mimic the movement patterns that they go through. This is just to activate the muscles involved in our sport. We also want to mobilize the joints. We do this to protect our athletes and prevent injury. We want them to make it through a healthy season and not get hurt training. During training, we want to include exercises that also mimic the patterns for similar reasons. Um, we want to make these muscles strong and the joints active and strong for the same exact reason as just make an athlete strong and more powerful and increase our sport performance. So these are some of the exercises that we'll be taking our athletes through, mainly lunges, as we're always on a unilateral position, primarily walking lunges because our initial phase is walking. Kettlebell exercises for our horizontal power, push exercises and pull exercises since we have those phases in our movement pattern in the actual sport. So we want to strengthen those muscles and movements. We have squat exercises for the lower half and trunk musculature. We have stabilization. Um, our athletes, like I said, are always in a unilateral position, so we want to make sure that they're always stable and making consistent throws down the lane. We also, with any athlete, want to have injury prevention exercises so we can have a healthy season. The first test that I'll be conducting is anthropometric tests. These include the height, weight, BMI, body fat percentage, and waist to hip ratio. We just really want to make sure that our athletes aren't obese. In bowling, you don't want your athlete to be top heavy and throw off their balance. It will impair their consistency. Just conducting this test to get a general sense of the athlete's body composition and to make sure there are no risks that I need to be aware of. The second test will be the 1 rep max power clean. This maximal test will give me a good idea of how trained an athlete is in the weight room and how much power that they can produce. It'll also help me prescribe certain weights for Olympic exercises. The third test is also a maximal test. We'll be testing the 1 rep max bench press. This will give me a good idea of the athlete's upper body strength. And similar to the power clean, it'll help me prescribe the weight on upper body exercises. The fourth test is the last maximal test, is a maximal squat test. This will give me an idea of how well the athlete will stabilize their trunk musculature and protect their spine. It'll also give me a pretty good estimate of ground force production. Ground force production is a big measurement in any athlete that is trying to increase their velocity. The back squat test will also help with prescribing intensity and weight, just like the other two maximal tests. The fifth test is a little different. It's a local muscular endurance test. The athlete will be doing as many push-ups as possible without stopping. This will help me gauge a muscular endurance aspect of the athlete, as that'll likely be our first phase in training, along with hypertrophy. It'll help me gauge the ability to which they can also brace their core, just like with the squat. It's a little bit different of a position. Gravity's pulling against your backside and pushing your core into the ground, and you have to keep a stable spine. So it'll be a good test. The sixth test is the final test that we'll be conducting. It's a non-fatiguing anaerobic test. I'll have the athletes perform a Wingate anaerobic test. Now, the reason I'm having them go through a Wingate test is to measure their fatigue index. With new athletes that you haven't worked with before, you want to know how quick they fatigue in a anaerobic setting, since we'll be lifting weights and not doing cardio. It also helps measure your peak anaerobic power and your mean anaerobic power. So we also get another test and metric for power. This will help me understand how quick an athlete loses that power and tires out. The order that we'll be prescribing these is actually a little different. We're splitting up into 2 days with 3 days between the testing days. Oops. The first day, the athletes will perform the anthropometric test, the max power clean, and the bench press test. And then the second day of testing will involve the max back squat, the push-up test, and the Wingate test. Some of the goal metrics are for anthropometric tests. We just want our athletes not to be obese, so a BMI below 30, because the overweight BMI doesn't take into account muscle mass, so athletes can be overweight but actually have a good body fat percentage. So for body fat percentage, we want our men to be 8 to 19%, women somewhere around 18 to 25%. We would like it to be more 20 to 25 just to be safe. Max power clean just above 100 pounds, and for women 85 pounds. Max bench is greater than or equal to body weight is your goal. Understand that not all athletes can do that. And then we want our max squat above 45 pounds. We want them to at least be able to do the bar, hopefully a little bit more.